Okay, I see our attendees rolling in. It's 9:59. We'll get started in about 1 minute. So it's my job to vamp here for a second while we let everybody kind of roll in here. We got a bunch of Trustero people on the line today to answer questions. So we'll go over this again in a second, but if you're already on the line, we do encourage you guys to use the chat, use the questionnaire tool or the questionnaire tool. That's one of the Trustero features. Use the question tool. Let us know where you're from. We like to make these things as interactive as possible. We're going to give stuff away. So we also may or may not give more stuff away to people who cooperate and or not cooperate, who are more active in the chat. So we always like to give away some prizes and stuff like that. So be active in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Ask questions. We love that. We want to hear your feedback. And with that, let's get rolling. So you can see my screen, right, Scott? Yeah, you can. Okay. So we are Trustero. We are here to talk about 5 game-changing use cases in GRC. My name is Michael. I'm the head of marketing here at Trustero. I'm joined by a bunch of my fellow Trusteroos, which is a name that we're testing out here. George is our newest Trusteroo. He's our CISO. I'm also joined by Nick Martin, who is our head of product here at Trustero. He's also a Trusteroo. So these guys are going to talk to us about some of the use cases that are out there today in GRC and how AI is impacting those. Nick is going to talk about what Trustero is doing with those use cases, and George is going to talk about kind of more generally how the industry looks at those use cases and what we do atomically as GRC leaders, like with those use cases, and what you can do for free also with AI tools with those use cases. A couple of housekeeping things, just to repeat. Number one, do ask questions. We want to hear your questions. Do tell us where you're from. Use the chat. And then number two, most importantly, save us some money on advertising because it is way more expensive to try to get your attention on Google Ads than it is to just give you stuff. So if you're at all interested in having a demo or an introduction with Trustero to see like what we could do for you and see if it could help you or your company, use that QR code that's on screen there. We'll send you one of these ridiculous Ember mugs that will keep your coffee hot for 12, 14 hours, 2 days, 3 days, whatever you need. Or we'll send you some Beats headphones or really like anything that you want that's kind of around the same price point. But we don't want to buy Google Ads anymore. And we'd much rather just send you a gift for your time. That way it goes straight to you. So please do that. For the first 5 people who do that today, we will send you one of these really cool gifts. And anybody else who does that, we'll probably send you something too. Maybe just won't be quite as expensive. A couple other announcements. Number one, Trustero is on the AWS Marketplace. So if you are interested in becoming a Trustero customer, this does make becoming a Trustero customer very easy. So search Trustero on AWS Marketplace if you're an AWS user. And see what our offering is there. If there's anything that's not on there that you want to use, we can essentially put anything in a package on the AWS Marketplace. We're doing something that we're really excited about. We're putting together a program called AI for GRC Advisors. This isn't necessarily about us or what we're building, but the vision here is we want to get together a bunch of InfoSec leaders and cybersecurity leaders and people that are just interested in the space and are really generally interested in what AI will do in this space and eventually put together a Slack or just an email list or just get together in person and just talk about what's going to happen and what our best ideas are and how this is going to change our jobs and everything, all of the above. So we'd love to have you sign up for that early. So use that QR code on the screen. We'll also send that link to that simple form in the email that we send after this webinar. So we'd love to have you on that if you're in the space and you're interested. Last thing, and this is just a pure brag, at the end of the year, we had some really good results from G2. We're a fairly young company, so this is a big deal for us when our customers and our users come back and say that we are, the easiest admin, the easiest to do business with, best support. So we just love that. So we thought it was okay for us to show that off in this context. Okay, let's move on. If you don't know who Trustero is, we've evolved a little bit over the years, but what we are is we are advanced AI for security and compliance. And the way that comes into effect is we do 5 really big groups of things with our AI. We can conduct audits, we can solution your compliance gaps, We can vet third parties, we can answer questionnaires, and we can provide you GRC intelligence in the moment, just like a human expert, for a fraction of the cost and much, much, much faster. And George and Nick are going to show you some of those in depth today. The way we do that is we ingest data from your GRC environment, including your GRC platforms, your cloud, your receptors, so your GitHub, your AWS, Azure, or whatever, your doc management, and then also manual uploads, so like CSV files, documents, screenshots, whatever. We pull that into Trustero and we create a trust graph. And once that trust graph is available and all of your data is there sitting in Trustero, we're able to do some really special things with our AI. And those are some of those things that we're going to show you today, those use cases. A little bit about how that works is that we call this ingest, organize, infer. And that's that process of pulling in that data, the organization, which is where really the Trustero, where our specialness is, like where all of our patents are with Trustero, is how we organize your data once it's in our trust graph. And then that inference, what we do with it is that inference is how we audit, how we answer questions, without knowledge bases, how we give you tailored guidance around GRC. And then some of the special things that we can do now, like control assurance, monitoring compliance, and things like that. All this kind of comes to fruition with all of these use cases. And we talk a lot about use cases at Trustero because I think that's how we're on this path, this journey to show people how AI can impact GRC. And really, since it's such a new space, we talk about use cases a lot because we want people to understand how could this actually impact your business? What are the actual use cases that our customers and your peers are using AI for? What are they doing? And what is the impact that it's actually having? So with that said, we're going to talk about just a few of those today. And Nick, I'm going to pass it off to you and George. And I'm going to ask my fellow Trusteroos to mute and go off camera so that we can let our friends here tell us about these first four use cases.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so we've got, whoops, I think we went forward one. Go back one slide, please, Michael. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to be talking to you about a number of different use cases that are kind of arranged in two big categories. So we have some capabilities here, some features that can be used to serve a few different use cases. And so I've got George with me here, my colleague, and he's got a wealth of experience as our CISO working and solving these, kind of the traditional way, and then also experience with perhaps in some cases using off-the-shelf AI components to assist with this. So he'll be covering that portion of it, and then I'll show you how it actually works in our platform, and you can see the difference, and hopefully see the time and drudgery and all the pain that our platform can help save for you. So George, why don't you talk to these for a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and thanks everyone for joining. The first use case kind of interesting, the customer questionnaires. I know that all of us have a kind of a love and hate relationship with questionnaires. If they're well done, they're very valuable. If not, then just kind of waste of time. But we all use them. They're kind of a tool for us to do a more specific, more targeted risk assessment of our suppliers. And we receive them from our customers and we have to answer. As you know, probably you've done questionnaires. The challenges are that, first of all, whoever answers the questionnaire has to have a really good understanding of your environment. You cannot get somebody from the street to just answer questionnaires. They have to understand the environment and they have to be a subject matter expert in the space. And there are quite a few tools out there that are trying to help us, and they're doing a pretty good job in terms of cataloging the answers, kind of maintaining a knowledge base. But still, there needs to be a person to actually go through this thing and be able to answer those questions. Now, where AI can help us here? AI is really good at contextualizing and answering. And as Nick mentioned, we all played probably with generic AI tools like NotebookLM or ChatGPT, where you can contextualize with your knowledge base that probably you already accumulated, and then try this tool to fill in the questionnaires. You can submit let's say an Excel spreadsheet with the questions and ask this thing to answer it, or you can do individual questions. And they're doing kind of okay, but there's some challenges here because, for example, they don't always understand the question exactly because they don't have all the context. Now, on the other side, if you look at specialized tool like ours, we don't have just the knowledge base that you uploaded, but we also have your policies, we have your controls. We even have access to the control test, to the evidence for those controls. Now, whether you want to expose that through the questionnaire, that's another consideration. How much of that is exposed, and also how do you expose it? Because as you know, answering the question, formulating the answer to the question, is also a little bit of an art by itself. So those generic tools, they do a pretty good job, but still they're kind of missing the mark a little bit. And Nick can talk a little bit more about how exactly we're doing the questionnaires. And then after that, we're going to talk about some more use cases that can span out of this functionality.
Yeah, great. Thanks, George. Okay, I will share my screen now and grab the right window. Okay. All right, so you guys are looking at a demo environment right now. And as you can probably tell from the name of the account down here, this is set up like a typical SaaS business that has SOC 2. And then in this case, everything's passing in the account. And so as George mentioned, security questionnaires are kind of a cost of doing business. Your customers are probably sending these in either at a regular cadence or certainly before buying. And the traditional way of managing that workflow typically means you've got a knowledge base that's set up, you're manually curating that thing, you're searching through it to find the right answers, that sort of thing. So we said, well, what if AI could just answer the questions for you? And what if it could leverage both an existing knowledge base, but also the platform information that George mentioned? So things like the company policies, the controls and evidence. And so that's exactly what we built. And in order to use it, someone would just navigate to this GRC questions portion of our UI. And there's a couple of different ways to use it. You can see there's the ask multiple questions. So that's great for this questionnaire use case. You come in here, give the questionnaire a name, and then you can either upload the questionnaire in bulk, so as a spreadsheet, or you can actually also just get in here and just ask the questions one at a time, manually, and put them in. And then this is great for these bulk situations. So you submit the question, and then you walk away and come back. And so here's an example right here of doing a standard questionnaire format, a CAIQ. Some of you may be familiar with that. And so what we did is we just uploaded all 261 CAIQ questions just as a spreadsheet, submit it to the system, and then we walk away, get lunch, whatever. As you can see in this case, this was actually on a previous version of our infrastructure. So this took a couple hours to answer these questions way faster, obviously, than a human being would typically do it. The new version actually is over 200% faster, or it takes about a third of the time. So the new version of this actually that we ran recently took more like 45 minutes, I believe. So much, much faster. It cranks through the questions. And then there's also a workflow for questionnaires, right? So George mentioned this problem of sometimes the knowledge is not in a single person's head. It may be distributed throughout the organization. So we actually have the workflow encoded here in the product as well. And so what you'll see is you'll get all the answers back, and maybe I can just start there. So this is the first question that happened to be in this questionnaire. Are all our audit and assurance policies, procedures, and standards established, documented, approved, blah, blah, blah. And then it provides the answer. Yes, our audit and assurance policies, procedures, and standards are comprehensively established, documented, approved, communicated, et cetera, et cetera. And it shows its work here. So for every one of these answers, it's going to give you a detailed response along with how it came to the conclusion. And it talks about the things that it's found in terms of the evidence and so forth that's in this account. And then also something that George mentioned is sometimes, the level of detail or the answer, you may want to tweak something about it, or perhaps, rewrite it from scratch. So we have that built in. You can edit any one of these answers, have it say whatever you want. And then there's an approval workflow in here as well. So you can accept the answer. And then once accepted, and once all the questions are accepted, and then you can mark the entire thing as accepted. And that's a way for an organization to track the life cycle of handling the particular questionnaire. And so what we found with this is something we use ourselves extensively, saves a ton of time, gives you answers, cites the reasoning, and has been a huge accelerant in terms of our ability to handle these questionnaires at scale. So that's the questionnaire use case.
And Nick, this is awesome. If we decide to edit the answer, let's say, I don't like how it is written right now, I need it a little bit more detailed, or I want to abstract it a little bit, and I can edit the answer. But that feeds back into the model. So next time when it answers, it gets closer and closer to what you want it to be.
Yeah, so we have a way that to feed those answers back in, exactly right. And so in addition to using the information that's in the platform from the controls, policies, and evidence, there is also a knowledge base feature that will build up over time. And so as you edit and then accept and ultimately accept the entire questionnaire, there's an option to feed those answers back into the knowledge base. And then as George mentioned, now the next time somebody answers that question, it will be fed the information that's in the knowledge base. And then the other cool thing about this is we know, kind of our attitude is life is too short to be manually maintaining knowledge bases. So as new answers come in, right? So things change over time. New answers supersede old answers, which is another very cool aspect of this knowledge base. And so if there was one answer, say 6 months ago, but things have changed, and then the new answer gets fed in, now the new answer is used, and the old answer won't show up in the future responses.
And Nick, I guess we can also have a kind of an accelerator, because I would assume that most of the people on the call, they already have some kind of a knowledge base to answering questionnaires, whether they're using a tool like RFPAO or Wistic or something like that, or a lot of companies, unfortunately, are still using just Excel spreadsheet with all the question and answers, but there is already accumulated knowledge somewhere, somehow. Can we leverage that knowledge?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for these knowledge bases, so this will actually show you the existing knowledge bases and then give you the ability to upload a new one. So you're absolutely right. Tons of organizations have an existing thing like this, and all somebody has to do is put it into a 2-column spreadsheet. So just question and answer. And then they export that as a CSV. That's just a 1-button click in Excel or in Google Sheets. You can just download it in CSV format, and then you just upload it here. And now that is the basis for answering new questions that are derived, from your existing knowledge base. So you can absolutely bootstrap all that existing knowledge into Trustero super, super fast.
Yeah, and we can keep updating it, so whenever things change, we actually know what is going on. Because that's on the other side, we always have access to your policies, your controls, your control testing, the environment, how it looks. So as the environment changes, and the answers also are going to change. And this is kind of the typical use case for this functionality. Get a questionnaire from our customer, either as a onboarding or during the review process. We feed it in, we review it, we answer it. I mean, it's an assistant. It doesn't replace the human. There still need to be a human to kind of have a look, but it saves, let's say, 80% of your time. So you don't feel like you're in Siberia answering questionnaires. But this functionality can be used for other things. And if we can switch back to the deck, we can talk about some other use cases that are related to this, similar, but not the same. to the questionnaire. So one thing that I found useful joining the company is none of us knows everything. And as I'm getting more acquainted to the security program here at Trustero, I have questions, very simple questions like, how often do we change the password? Do we use VPN? What are the requirements for our encryption? The traditional way of doing this is I need to find the person who is responsible for this and ask the questions and gain knowledge. Versus what I'm doing with Trustero is actually use this tool, ask questions, and that's how I get accommodated with the environment. So from a CISO perspective, that's really important, and that's again for the from a security kind of from the internal function, but also very often we get questions of, oh, do we have this framework, or when are we going to have that one, and how far away are we from, okay, we have SOC 2, we're thinking about ISO, or we're thinking about HIPAA, and I want to know what is the delta between where I am and where I want to be. And I know that very often those questions come from, let's say, sales folks who are trying to close a deal, and they say, when are we going to have this? What does it need to for us to get there? So our ability to do this kind of a what if analysis, like we call them gap analysis, but very often their what if analysis is super important. And it's not just the customer facing folks, but also legal comes to us and say, how are we doing this? Are we doing that? So those are two separate use cases where we can use the questionnaire tool to either quickly run what if analysis, gap analysis, and then that will inform our planning process, or we have questions from either internal audit or from legal, and we need to answer those questions.
That's right. Yeah. So I can show an example of that using the exact same capability, but using a slightly different way. So, so again, we're here just doing the same bulk Q&A feature. And you'll see here, we've got a PCI design assessment. And so this is, again, a SOC 2 account. And so this is answering the question, what if we wanted to do PCI? So all we did is we took the PCI standard and we phrased the standard in the form of a question, and just asked questions essentially. So you'll see we've got this same pattern here for this now 144 question questionnaire. Does the accounts control set include a control equivalent to PCI DSS requirement 1.1.1, ensuring that security policies and procedures are documented, up to date, actively used, and known to affected parties? And then the exact same system will answer the question, citing the reason why, and providing relevant details. And this way, an organization can do something like a design assessment in a matter of, like I said, this is the old version. So this one took a little over 90 minutes. Today it would be much faster. You can get an answer that would have previously taken perhaps weeks to get, and it'll be done in under an hour. So super, super powerful. And you can see, just answer after answer with the reasoning. And it explains, why, or in some cases, why not. It'll say, yeah, it doesn't explicitly cover this requirement, blah, 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 and tells you why.
So Nick, there is an expansion box which says show sources. This is actually an interesting one because the previous question 12, for example, yes, we covered that requirement. We don't have a gap there with PCI DSS, but we can actually show why. We can reference.
That's right. Yeah. So, and in fact, George, so this is the existing capability. We have a more advanced capability that'll have this show sources thing that's going to be pervasive throughout the product. So this was kind of the early version where it works for one type of the answers that we provide. But in the future, we're going to have this be everywhere, and it will be much more visible and easy to track, actually. So stay tuned for that in a upcoming webinar.
Yes, yeah. So kind of to wrap it up, if you want to do a gap assessment, you have your controls, you take the new control framework that you want to assess the gap against, you flip the controls in form of a questionnaire, you uploaded the questionnaire, and you get the gap assessment. And again, this is an assistant. We have to point out that there still need to be a human in the chain, but it saves like 80% of the time. So instead of having a group of consultants or your internal staff for 3 months doing this gap assessment, we get you 80% there in a matter of an hour.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly right.
Hey, Nick.
So, yep.
Nick and George, we had a good question, and try not to spend 30 minutes answering it. How
Uh-oh, we lost you, Michael.
We lost your voice, Michael.
Yeah, I think my internet's struggling a little bit. Maybe George can re-ask it because he's in the same room as me.
So if I hear you through the room, the question is about the accuracy. How do we know that this is accurate?
Yeah, great question.
That's a really good question. And yeah, in the AI space, we talk about the accuracy and we bring in the question about hallucination and all that kind of stuff. And we do have some interesting features internally on the back end of the tool. And I'm sure Nick will be super happy to talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing that we will do is we actually take quite a lot of effort to make sure that we're capable of answering the question. So our system is not shy about saying that it can't tell or it doesn't know. And we built that on purpose. And so we have reliable techniques for figuring out that we actually don't have something that we can confidently use as the basis for answering the question. And it turns out for hallucinations, that's that's probably the most important thing. LLMs in the absence of information are very happy to give you information that they make up. So that's one of the things that we do. And then the other thing that we do to help with accuracy is show our work. So like George mentioned, the system's designed to have a human in the loop. And then what we do is we provide as much detail and information for the human so they understand the basis for the decision. And today, a lot of that is actually not surfaced in our user experience as well as it will be shortly. So the site sources is one example of that. And there are other things like that that are coming. So there's a lot that's going on under the hood, and we're making more and more of that visible all the time. But today, what you'll see is in those text responses, they explain the reasoning, how they came to the conclusion, that sort of thing. So those are some things we do to help with reliability.
And the tool is not shy. If it doesn't know something, it will say, "Hey, I don't have enough information to answer the question," rather than inventing answers.
That's right.
So talk about another use case for the questionnaire that I've seen quite a bit, and maybe it's going to resonate with those of you who are in the regulated space. You get a letter from the regulator. There is a new risk, new threat out there, and they're asking, "Okay, how are you guys doing about this? What are you doing about that?" And usually that letter is received from the legal department, and somebody from legal will come and say, "Hey, I want to know exactly what kind of encryption we're using, where we're using it, and those kind of things." And the traditional way is, again, trying to find out who knows about that and trying to collect evidence and then collate the answer and then work with legal to exactly adjust the answer. And then legal will take it and supply it to the regulator. Now, we won't be able to give you exactly the answer that you have to supply with the regulator. It always has to go through somebody from the legal department, but we'll help you with collecting that evidence by, again, asking the question, getting the answer, getting the reference to the evidence that supplied that answer, how we came up with that answer, and then you can take it to the legal. And actually, I would even recommend exposing this tool to the legal department and tell them to ask questions, still verify the answers with you, but at least they can start educating themselves. In kind of the similar vein, internal audit. I know that a lot of us are working with internal audit, and internal audit have questions all the time. This will kind of shorten the amount of time necessary to answer to the internal audit. Again, we have to check those answers. We have to make sure that they are okay, but in 80% of the time, they're going to be okay. Now, there is a kind of a psychological moment here, because if you see that the system is giving you correct answer over and over and over, you may relax and say the next one is going to be okay as well. No, you have to make sure that it's right. So that's why we are saying this is an assistant. It doesn't replace a GRC person.
That's right. And so we started kind of the pain point we started with was asking questions in bulk. And then later we ended up, because there were these one-off questions, right? We ended up adding the capability to ask a one-off question. And so here you can see, here's some past questions that we asked. I'm going to flip this over to here. And then, you can just very quickly ask a question like this. And now what it's doing is it's actually looking through the evidence and controls in the system in order to come back and give us an answer here. And so that's a very useful, very useful capability, whether it's a regulatory response, internal audit use case. Perhaps it's somebody in the engineering organization who's wondering how often something should be, taking place. So here's an example then of an answer that was generated by actually looking at the evidence that's in the system.
And I would like to point out that this is very specific. If you look at actually cites the name of the tool and exactly when it's happening and all that stuff. So it could be as specific as you want it to be.
That's right. Yep. Okay. I think then that does it on Q&A. And I think we want to, unless there's anything else you want to wrap up on there, George.
No, I'm good. I mean, there are quite a few questions. And Michael, I know that you're monitoring the chat. Is there anything else that probably we need to cover?
No, not right now. I think if there's anything else that kind of requires a live big answer, we'll pop in and let you know. But let's move on to our next section.
Okay, great. Yeah. So George, you want to take this away and kind of talk about big
Yeah,
picture?
this is another functionality that cover different type of use cases. And I think Agustina on the side chat asked about, okay, how do we get ready for an audit? Can we make sure that we are ready for the internal audit and for the external audit? How do we check the controls? How do we check the the evidence? So let's talk about the whole chain. Once you decide on what you need to do on the risks, you have your policy sets, and you attach control objectives to those policy sets, and then control procedures that meet those objectives. Then you design how you collect evidence that those control procedures are exercised, and then you design a test to make sure that, yes, those control procedures are exercised. So that's kind of the regular GRC chain that all of us are familiar with. So if you think about it, there are multiple tests that you need to do throughout this chain. First of all, do I have the right control objectives to the policies? Then do I have the right control procedures to meet those objectives? And do I have the evidence necessary for that control procedure? And then when we talk about the evidence, I would like to distinguish, because a lot of tools allow you to upload evidence, but they're not looking inside the evidence to make sure that this really meets the control procedure. Like the proverbial, I uploaded a picture of a cat and that's the evidence for my DR test. There are tools that are going to be okay with that. However, we as humans, we need to look at it and not only see that this is a result of my DR test, but also, are there any findings from that DR test? Because I may conducted a DR test, but I still don't meet the objective of the control. So checking all of those things, of course, takes a lot of time, and that's what we call in audit readiness. We even do sample of 2 or something like that to make sure that we are ready for the audit. And Nick is going to show us how we can use the tool to do this audit readiness, to do all of those checks. Not only that, but also if we find something that doesn't meet the criteria, there may be a recommendation of, okay, how do we check on this thing? So Nick, why don't you take it away?
Yeah. And so what we've got here, you can think of it as kind of stacked set of capabilities, starting from all the way down at a control and doing checks on that control. So design, implementation, operating effectiveness check at the control level. Then doing a group of controls. So that's how we're able to figure out how well we're doing on our audit journey, how ready we are for audit. And then perhaps it's being able to, on demand, conduct internal audits. And then finally, the dream state that everybody wants to get to is I want you to just to audit me continuously, so that I make sure that everything is always working. So I'll kind of build up one at a time and show you these capabilities and how they stack on top of each other and help enable all those different kind of levels of examination and testing. So I will switch back over to product. Okay. So we're gonna move now into compliance, and I'll just start you on an example control here, which is this data backup and disaster recovery control. So pretty typical control that most organizations have for InfoSec compliance. Backup copies of information, software, and systems are maintained and regularly tested to enable recovery from data loss or system disruptions and ensure alignment with defined RTOs. So basically, you're backing up your stuff and you're practicing restoring. And we can see here then for the control, there's certain required evidence we have, and then there are test procedures for these items. And I'm not going to belabor this, but I'll focus on one of these that kind of shows off a bunch of stuff that George talked about. So you see here, we've got this annual backup test documentation. That's one of the pieces of evidence we need. And then we've got a test procedure for that, which is validating that we've got this thing documented for the most recent annual backup and restore test, and confirm that it includes the date of the test, the RTOs, test results, identified gaps or lessons learned, and updates made to procedures based on the test outcomes. Okay, so we're going to be looking for quite a few things in here. And George is absolutely right. In some circumstances, it literally is just check a box, upload a thing, check a box. Oh yeah, I did that. But how do you know for sure? That's where AI can be extremely helpful. And so I'll show you first the piece of evidence. This is our annual data backup and restore test piece of evidence. So you can see, it happened December 16th, and here's the people, and here's what they did, and all the things that they covered. Okay, so pretty typical piece of evidence. And so from my human perspective, looks pretty good. Let's see what the examination and test did. So it's gonna look at three separate things. First of all, it's actually going to do a bit of a design assessment. So it's making sure the control objective and the parent policy align, so that it's looking for material differences. Check means good. And then, like we covered before, it gives you a lot of reasons why it's in good shape. So there's a policy document. It does indeed cover all this stuff. So you're good there. Then it's going to say, okay, did I get all the evidence that I should have had attached to the control? Yes, indeed, we do. And now zooming in on the particular test that we talked about before, the annual backup test validation, here's where it's actually running that test procedure on the piece of evidence. So this test is satisfied by the presence of detailed standalone documentation for the most recent annual backup test. The document includes all the necessary details such as the date, RTOs, outcomes, confirming that annual tests are conducted thoroughly and improvements are made based on the findings. So here it's examined, it's actually done that operating effectiveness check for you and said, yep, you're good. So this is kind of lensed all the way in on a single control. And George, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on this.
I cannot help but notice that even the language that it uses, it's like an auditor language. It's almost like they can copy and paste in the audit report.
Right. And that may have even happened. Yes. That's exactly right. So we try to give it to you, all of this. We try to make sure it's all very GRC terminology aligned. It all is going to make sense for the folks who are, doing this kind of work every single day. That's what we're aiming for here.
And if it doesn't, and let's say some of the checks do not pass, I guess it will give us the red flag, but also it will suggest something to do in order to fix the problem.
Indeed, yes. It calls out gaps and it provides suggested remediations. That's exactly right.
Nick,
Yeah.
could you elaborate on that for a moment? Because we did have a question on that earlier from Augustina. He said, considering the PCI example that you were talking about earlier, the PCI gap example, when there is non-compliance, what does Trustero do to recommend and get back on track?
Yeah, great question. And actually, one of the problems we have right now is our demos are all clean and nice. So we're actually working on one that has some failure cases. So that'll be done here very soon. But I'll just describe it because unfortunately I don't have a go-to that I can just show you right now. But on any of the checks that fails, what's going to happen is green check turns a red X. So first of all, it'll flag it in a very simple way, and I'll show you what it looks like up leveled as well. So it's going to tell you there's a problem. And then where the particular problem occurred, it again will very patiently explain both the good and the bad. And then when there is a bad, it will also then in this narrative, it will also explain what it would suggest to do to go and fix it. And there are also some things that we're doing to pull those out and make them even clearer. But today, very patiently explains it in the text is what you're going to get.
Yeah, and because there's some questions here, I just want to be clear that we can sit on any kind of a GRC. So whatever you're using, keep using it. We'll connect to it. We'll pull the data. So in terms of your policies, your controls, we're going to pull that data, and we have something called the Trustero graph, and that's where the AI help us create those connections. Like these policies, these controls belong to that policy. These evidence belong to that control. So in terms of a workflow and catalog of your GRC information, keep using what you're using. Now, we also have the capability to move entirely to us. If you're on spreadsheets and Google Docs and you want something better organized, yes, you can do that. But if you have Archer, if you have Vanta, if you have whatever you're using, we can sit on top of it, pull the information, and do the analysis. The other question that came here on the site is, I want to make sure that everybody understand this is not tied to a particular framework. Currently, we're using SOC 2 just as an example. For all intents and purposes, you can have your own unified control framework that includes SOC, ISO, high trust, your own specific controls, and this will work exactly the same way.
That's right. Yeah, the system's totally agnostic. It does not care what the framework is. It just purely relies on the evidence, objective test procedures, et cetera, which are, I should also mention, all of this is completely editable. And then we have ways to bulk import as well. So I could change this right now and it would do something different.
And it will take it into consideration when it does the next verification.
Exactly. So I could change this test. I could add tests. I could remove tests, and then examine and test again, and I would get updated results as a result of those changes.
So in a way, asking us which frameworks do you support, that's not the right question. We pretty much support anything. It could be even outside of security.
Yeah. So we support everything. We do have curated content sets as well, and of those there are a limited number. We're adding new ones all the time. So we've got infosec and privacy frameworks today, but our system has been used with completely custom controls and frameworks, and it works great. That's something we do all the time. Okay, so then let's up level it. We're seeing it kind of at the micro level. Let's step back and see what it would look like to conduct in bulk. So you can also just say, hey, I want to just examine and test everything. Or maybe it's I want to select which controls to examine and test. So that's always here. This is really good for things like internal audit. I just want to do everything from scratch right now, see where I'm at. So that's a capability that's here. We also have another capability that's built on top of that. So this is what we call our compliance roadmap. And the idea here is we know, compliance journey, there's many, many steps. And so we want to introduce things in an order that's productive and useful for the organization. And typically proving operating effectiveness, that's near the end of the line. But you want to make sure your design is in good shape earlier on. And so, this is where our control policy material difference check would be conducted. And so this allows you to step through it in baby steps. And so in this case, this is just making sure that your control objective and the policy don't clash. And sometimes actually they do end up clashing. So a classic example of this would be a cadence change. Let's say for whatever reason, the cadences of the control and policy got out of sync. One got updated, the other didn't. And so now the control is saying something needs to happen once a year, and the policy says it needs to happen once a month. You don't want that to happen. That would be a gap or an audit finding, as well as obviously not being great for, your security practices. So we help you clean up those things and find them early. And then along the way, that when you're ready and you've actually gathered evidence and so forth, then we introduce, actually conducting the operating effectiveness checks and doing it at a time where it's helpful. So these are different roll-ups that we have actually so you can do one control at a time, you can do all of them, you can also do them in baby steps and kind of push through in an order that makes sense. And then the final one I'll show off is here on our dashboard. And this is where you get into what we call control assurance, sometimes called continuous monitoring or continuous compliance. That term we found has been a little bit watered down because they're not, people who claim that are usually not actually examining the evidence in real depth. So the cat pick problem that George talked about, or just checking boxes. As you guys have seen, we actually examine the real documents. And so this is a way to just be continuously up to date. And what we do is scan all the controls on the frequency that you specify. So in this case, it's every day. And then if there's a problem, we surface it here in this dashboard. So it is super clear that there's a problem. And then you can go and look at the particular control and see what went wrong and then get a recommendation on how to remediate it.
And several things to point here that while we can deal with uploaded evidence like manual evidence, what you showed with the DR test, we also have receptors, so they can connect to different tools that you have in the environment. So let's say to your identity and access management system, and it can pull a list of your privileged accounts, and then it can check it against the actual list of privileged. So it can do a lot of receptors. And because we can sit on top of an existing GRC solution, a lot of them, they also have their own receptors, so we can get the data that way through another GRC solution. Another thing that I wanted to point out here is that even with the audit, because we are humans, we have limitations, we use statistical approaches. So we are all familiar with sampling, and there are rules of how to sample and when to sample and how many samples to pull and all that kind of stuff. The difference here is that when we do the check, we do 100%. So if you provide the audit period, this thing will check for all the controls, all the evidence throughout the audit period. So in terms of assurance, that someone can argue that this is even better than the auditors.
That's right. Yeah. So the level of assurance is higher. The way we describe it is populations by default, sampling when necessary. There is a point actually at which our system will sample, but it samples at a level that's higher than audit requirements. So we always take a minimum of 250 samples. In some cases, actually, it's typically many more than that.
Yeah.
So we'll look at everything. So the thing that our clients find is if they can pass, the examination and test that our AI will conduct, they are in great shape for a third-party audit because third-party audit is only, it's going to subsample.
Yeah. So we were talking of this functionality in terms of a readiness. So how do we get ready for the audit? But Nick, this can very well be used by internal audit to actually conduct their own audit, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a thing that we see is, sorry, here. A great milestone to achieve is if, let's say you're adopting a brand new framework. What will happen is, this will be at 0 or near 0 when you start, and it's a game of turn all these green. And by the time you turn all these green, now, your internal audit team is going to be pretty bored probably because they're going to be looking at everything and it's going to be in good shape. And this is how So if you get this whole thing to 100%, then you're in awesome, you're in a state of extreme audit readiness, I would say.
Yeah. So if we think about the life cycle, we can use Questionnaire to do the assessment, figure out what needs to be done. Then we implement, we come over here and we get ready for the audit. Then the internal audit can use this thing to do their own internal audit procedure. But then at the same time, you mentioned the cadence of how often we run it. We can turn it into a continuous control monitoring, or whatever the term we would like to use for that, which means that we catch things before they become an issue. Because, for example, with the SOC 2 is very common. You find issues just during the readiness, or God forbid, during the audit. With running this continuous assurance, then you can find them and you get actually a recommendation of how to fix something.
That's right. Yeah, one of the things that we're really big on is shortening those feedback loops. And there's a lot of really long feedback loops in GRC. So we want to be able to arm people with information as fast as possible so they can take the action necessary to, manage that risk really aggressively if it makes sense, or maybe something's not such a big deal, that's okay too. But at least and you can make an informed decision. Today, we know a lot of GRC decision makers, they're kind of flying blind, between audits or that sort of thing. So this just gives them the information to know what's actually going on.
So Robert had a question, and I'm sorry, Robert, we missed it in the flow. Let's explain how we ensure that the citations are aligned to the regulatory obligations. So how do we know that we reference the right evidence and the right control in accordance to the control framework?
Sure, yeah. So this is going to get clearer soon, but yeah, let's pull up this PCI one again. What you'll see in the narrative is it will explain the sources that it's relying on. And in this case, this is one of those that will actually tell you the questions that it drew on from the previous knowledge base. If I find one here, let me find another one. Let's do this and get through the ones. Yeah, get to advanced. What you'll see today is it'll tell you the things that it's relying on. So the demo platform architecture diagram, that's one. Network security policy is another that's drawing on in this case. It tells you the control that it's relied on. So what is going to change is that we'll also make these, we'll have these as kind of EndNote style here, and then you'll actually be able to click through and go and inspect the document yourself if you want to. We've found that these are highly, highly reliable. Like if it's citing them, there's a very good reason for it. But we're just going to make that even more clear and explicit by having links to the particular documents.
And Robert, I hope this answered the question. Currently, we're just mentioning the document. In the future, we're going to have a reference that you can actually open the document. But if you want to dive deeper, I'm sure Michael will be more than happy to set up time for us to go into the details.
Absolutely.
3 minutes, George and Nick.
Okay. Well, I think that does it for our use cases.
Yeah. So we covered two basic functionalities. One is questionnaires, either individual or in bulk, and we covered the audit, which could be used for readiness, could be used for actual audit, it could be used for continuous control monitoring. Same thing with the questionnaire, could be individual questions, multiple questions. It could be used to answer kind of traditionally answer the questions from the customers, or it could be used for answering to the regulators, or for your own education to figure out how the system behaves.
Okay. And Michael, we're seeing your desktop.
Yeah, I'm having an issue here. Hold on 1 second.
I could share. I got the slides up if you want me.
There you go.
Yeah, you got it.
Did that fix it? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
Scott's going to take over because I'm having an internet problem here.
yeah, awesome, guys. This was a great webinar. Thank you to George and Nick, who did most of the heavy lifting, Michael for being our MC. This is a great group of attendees, great questions. So we would love the opportunity to connect one-on-one with all of you guys. Take us up on our offer here, book a meeting, get something really cool in the mail from us. As Michael said earlier on, we are an AWS Marketplace partner. So if you have the need to do business through the marketplace, we would love to do that. And then I'm looking forward to meeting with everybody one-on-one and going deep on how Trustero can solve some of the toughest use cases for GRC teams and InfoSec leaders. So just want to thank everybody again. It was a wonderful call, great questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.